Hello and welcome to the BucketLister Podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the BucketLister Podcast. I am your host Keith Crockford and today I'm going to be chatting about training for Kilimanjaro. Now, this came from a conversation that I was having this week and someone said it would be a really good podcast episode if I did some training guides for some of the trips that we do at the Bucket List Company, and more specifically for trips such as Kilimanjaro or Everest Base Camp or Machu Picchu, that, generally a lot of people go and do every year. So I thought, what a great idea, easy for me to be able to talk about that. And so I thought, well, let's start then with Kilimanjaro, as that was the conversation that I was having with somebody. So Kilimanjaro, I've said it before, that I personally think that the majority of people can achieve to climb Kilimanjaro. As I've said before, it is not a technical climb. It is a trekking peak. And ultimately, you just need to put one foot in front of the other to get to the top. Now, I've kind of been slammed for that. And I went out on TikTok and Instagram and everyone was kind of complaining about how I made that comment that it was just put one foot in front of the other. And that's not how I was really phrasing it. I was kind of phrasing it in a way that it's not technical in terms of you don't need any specialist training. All you need to be able to do is put one foot in front of the other and you will get to the top. Now, as and it was a snippet that was taken from the podcast. It wasn't kind of, if they'd listened to the whole thing, I then went on to say, summit night is really, really hard and probably one of the hardest things that you'll ever do. So I certainly don't ever play down Kilimanjaro. It is a real challenge. But I still think that with the right training, anybody can get to the top of Kilimanjaro, and I still stand by that. But I think, first things you need to look at with Kilimanjaro is before you even start the training is to select the right route for you for the climb. Now, you can, there are anything from 5 to 10 day routes to get up Kilimanjaro. I certainly wouldn't be advising a 5-day route. I've only ever done a 5-day once, and the altitude gain and the altitude profile of that one, it was, is very big. And it certainly does take it out of you. And I certainly, won't be jumping up to go back and do another 5-day route anytime soon. But there's kind of two reasons I say this, because obviously for some people that have never done this type of thing before, trekking for 10 days is quite hard. So you might think, well, actually, I'll take one of the lesser day routes. And then, it might be a bit easier. And I think for some people, potentially there could be a case for that. I think, obviously the altitude profile is going to be a lot more severe than if you took one of the longer routes. But obviously you are not on your feet for so long. So that's a consideration that you need to take before even thinking about training for Kilimanjaro, is actually which route it is that you're going to do. The other thing when it comes to training that you need to think about is kind of where you live, because a lot of people live in very flat places and it's very hard for them to actually do any training up and down hills. And just going out running, I always say to people, is not enough to train to climb a mountain. It's a great start, and having a good cardio ability is very beneficial when it comes to climbing mountains. But that's not the only thing you need to do from a training perspective. Obviously, Kilimanjaro is very steep in places, and that's what you really need to be training for. And likewise, you need to be training for the duration as well, because like I said, ultimately we can all go out and do a long walk on a Saturday, and maybe we could even do a long walk on a Sunday. But then obviously most people return back to work on Monday morning. That kind of stops our multi-day trekking training in terms of that. So it is important that, if you need to be training kind of 6 times a week, if you're thinking of doing like a Kilimanjaro and Everest base camp trek, and then have a rest day once a week. But I think it's super important to be doing something at least 6 times a week within your training, sort of when you're training for the climb. And a lot of people ask me, like, how far before you're going to climb Kilimanjaro do I need to start training? And I think the answer to that realistically is sort of where you're coming from in the first place. If you're already kind of going to the gym and you're quite fit, and you're running, and you do weight, you do some weight training and core training, then obviously it's not going to take you as long to get into shape. But if you're kind of coming from the couch, if you like, and haven't done a great deal, then it's probably you're going to be looking at kind of like 6 months build up realistically to get you into a good shape to be able to do Kili. I think if you're already coming from a good level, then actually kind of 2 to 3 months will get you in good shape for the summit night. So what would I recommend from a training perspective then? And I think the key to this is, I always say to people, and nowadays, like more and more people have got heart rate monitors on their watches. You might have a Garmin, or you might have an iPhone that takes your pulse. And it's the first thing I recommend to people is to work out your heart rate zones. Because actually you don't need to be training super hard for a Kilimanjaro trip. And I would say that realistically, most of your training is going to be done within zone 2 of your heart rate, stepping into kind of zone 3. And having an understanding of actually what those things mean is super important. Because you don't want to be doing the wrong sort of training. And ultimately, you're going to need to know where your zones are. And those are different compared to your age, your weight. So understanding that is really important. But actually, what zone training means is it kind of slows you down. And makes you think about where you need to be training and what your heart rate needs to be as you're training. And obviously, when you are going on a trek, you're not kind of working at your maximum while you're walking. So that's why it's important when you're training, to be training at the lower zones. So getting a good understanding of that is super, super important, and a great place to start for your training. And the other thing that you need to think about is, like I said earlier, what you've got around you. And if you haven't got hills to go and train on, then you're going to need to go to the gym, or you're going to need to have access to a Stairmaster or a treadmill that has a decent incline on it. So you can actually be spending your time replicating what you are going to be doing whilst you're on the trek. Similarly, like, you're going to be training with a bag on your back with some weight in it, because that needs to, again, replicate what you're doing whilst you're on the trip. So for me, it's about, ultimately you could go into a gym, put the treadmill on the highest incline, or get on the Stairmaster, and an hour's training at kind of in your zone 2 or beginning of zone 3 is kind of hour to an hour and a half, I would say, is great training. And that's something you can do on a daily basis. Obviously, going out for a walk in the hills for 8 hours is brilliant. But like I said earlier, that's not realistic to a lot of people. So that's what I would be doing. I would be thinking about practicing, on an incline. So either with a Stairmaster or treadmill with a big incline if you can't access hills, or even if you can access hills, but you're not going to do that 6 days a week. So that's where I would be starting. Obviously, starting with lower weight in your rucksack, and then as you're getting there, adding some weight to what you're going to be carrying. Thinking about if you're going to be carrying 2 liters of water, your pack needs to be kind of 5-7K, I would say, is what you're going to be carrying each day on the trek. So just bear that in mind. Some people will be carrying 3 liters of water, so there's 3K already, plus some spare clothing, plus some snacks, plus maybe their camera. So think about what you're going to have in your bag, how heavy it's going to be, and make sure you're training with that weight. The other thing that people don't do enough of when it comes to either Everest Base Camp, Kilimanjaro, or Machu Picchu, actually, or an Inca Trail trek, is practicing walking downhill. People think about the uphills, but they certainly don't think about the downhills. And core stability and leg strength for moving down is also as important as moving up. After summit, once you summit on Kilimanjaro, whichever route you're doing, you've then got you're sort of coming back down in a day and a half from the summit all the way back down. So what maybe have taken you 4, 5, 6 days to walk up, you're going to come back that down very, very quickly. You're going to be tired. There are lots of steps on the way back down on some of the routes, and they're quite big steps as well. So, having that stability, strength in your core and in your legs is super important. So for me, I would recommend compound lifting. So go into a gym, like looking at doing squats, looking at doing deadlifts, and really working on your back, on your core, and on your legs. So that's what I do, and that's certainly what I would be advising as part of training for any of these treks, really, is not just concentrating on just going for a walk, but like I say, concentrate on your core, concentrate on your leg strength as well, for both up and for down hills as well. So think about those things. Obviously, gyms are super great places. I get some people don't like the gym. There are, plyometric exercises you can do at home. You can do weighted squats, or you can just do squats. But, you can get yourself a set of dumbbells and practice doing squats at home if you don't want to go to the gym. But I think that is a great way of getting fitter and being more prepared for your trip. Another thing I do, and I know I say running's not is not everything. Like, being able to run is it helps your cardio, it helps your VO2 max. It will, the fitter you are, will aid you in acclimatizing as your way up on your way up. And one thing that I do as part of my training is I do quite a lot of hill running. And, about a mile down the road from me, I've got a nice big hill that's about 100 meters long. And I'll just spend time, do 10 reps of, jogging up it, not sprinting up it, but, I'm going probably, normalish pace. When I get to the top, I then just slowly jog back down. And I repeat that process like 10 or 12 times as one of my sessions. And I find that really does help with cardio and VO2 max, but also with my leg strength as well. And, that is what you need to do for any of these trips is build up that leg strength. As I said before, people aren't used to multi-day trekking, and anyone can go out and go for a walk and smash out 10 miles in 12 miles in, it, but that's not what's going to help you on Kilimanjaro. Doing it once is certainly not going to help your training in terms of, walking for 6, 7, 8 days. And when we come Kilimanjaro, the distances, apart from on the way down, they're quite long. But on the way up, the actual distances are not very great. And we tend to talk a lot more in hours rather than distance when it comes to Everest Base Camp or Kilimanjaro. There are distances, but obviously they are, you tend to find that if you are wearing a watch and you are tracking your route, what the distance that, you read on the internet is completely different to actually how much you've walked that day, because obviously you're not going the shortest way that you can get there. So we tend to talk in hours, and it might be that today is a 7-hour day and tomorrow is an 8-hour day. So it's more about how long you're on your feet for, rather than saying, well, I went and walked 16 miles today, because obviously walking 16 miles on the flat is different to 10K at altitude on a mountain for 8 hours. So don't just think about the distances, and look at the distances that, because the other thing is it always surprises people how long walking at altitude takes, because, they kind of work it out that actually, it's today is saying on the thing, it's 12 kilometers to get from, where we're starting to camp this evening. So that's, I walk 4 kilometers an hour. So that's only 3 hours of walking today, and I'll be fine with that. And actually, then they're out for like 6, 7 hours. And they wonder what the hell's going on and why today's so, so tiring. So just be prepared for that. And also, obviously, when you are going out and doing your training, being on your feet for that amount of time is really important. And one thing that I try and advise people to do. Obviously, long hikes are important. If you can get out at weekends and go and do long hikes, that's brilliant. If you can do it on a Saturday and then get up and do another one on a Sunday. And it doesn't, like I say, it doesn't necessarily need to be long distances, but long time and duration is more important than going out and really hammering it. Because obviously you are going to be walking a lot slower at altitude. And actually that is something you can practice, is walking slower, because for some people, like, they really struggle when we sort of start setting the pace. People, because they're so used to training in the UK and it's sea level and, not being at altitude, they kind of think that we're holding them back and we're slowing them down and they want to go quicker. But there is a reason for that. And generally by summit night, they kind of have got it. But for some people, walking slowly is really difficult. So, practicing that actually might be a good idea. Other things you can train for is in terms of, like I said, with weight, adding to the weight is really important. Don't start off with a really heavy bag, build up to it. Other things is mix up your training. Don't keep doing the same things over and over again. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with going for a run. It's great for cardio. There's nothing wrong going to the gym. If, for example, your legs are hurting, or you've got a little niggle and you don't want to go out walking, you can get on a bike and go and cycle up some hills. That's going to be really good for you. You can go swimming. Any training is good training, but obviously, and also another good training is actually stretching and yoga and Pilates and those sorts of things. Again, they're both good for the core, but also being flexible also helps you when you're walking as well. So the more you can mix it up, I would say, the better. And you just don't get bored of it then. And, you become to enjoy it. But the biggest tip from me realistically is the multi-day training. If you can get out and, even if you can train on Saturday and a Sunday with a long walk, and then you can get up on a Monday morning before work or walk into work and try and get even like 2 hours in of a walk into work in the morning. That's the good training. Being able to go to bed, get up, and then go walking again is what I advise for people to do as much as they can, because that's kind of the whole point of the trip. And obviously, if you can get hills into that as well, then even better. So key takeaways from me on this episode then is obviously the more walking you can do, the better. Try and research about your heart zones so you can try and work out where your training zones need to be. And you really want to be keeping your training in zone 2, maybe going up a little bit into zone 3, but you don't need to be hammering it and getting your heart rate up massively in the training that you're going to be doing for these trips. So do some research on your heart rate zones, look at where you should be, and then use that as a guide for your training. And then obviously, as I said, depending on where you live, depending on what you've got access to, then really consider, are you going to be going to the gym? Have you got hills around you? Do you live in North Wales where you can get out into the mountains, in the Brecons? Have you got those things on your doorstep? Or are you going to need to be going into a gym and thinking about the Stairmaster or a treadmill on a big incline? So those are my key takeaways from that of how to train for Kilimanjaro. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is nutrition. And obviously, when you are training, eating properly will help you with your training, get the most out of you. But also as well, like going into the trip, the best you can be. So not only being fit and ready, but also your body being ready to start the trip. Obviously, you are going to be burning loads of energy on the trip. So the more you can be, the more you can be ready for it. And, in the weeks coming up to the trip, if you're properly hydrated, if you're eating really well beforehand, if you're replacing everything your body needs and putting it back in, then that's going to get you in the best shape to climb Kilimanjaro. Hopefully you've found this episode useful. Hopefully it's given you some thoughts into, if you're considering doing Kilimanjaro, what you need to do with your training to get you there. As I said at the start, and I do stand by this, that, I think that, the majority of people can get up to the top of Kilimanjaro. I have taken people up there who, I've met at the airport beforehand, and they've gone, yeah, I really meant to train for this, but kind of time just ran away from me. And, I've hardly done anything, and they've managed to get to the top. And, if they had been fitter, I would say they probably would have enjoyed it more. But, they still managed to achieve their goal. But I think, the fitter you can go into it, the more you're going to enjoy it, and the more fun you're going to have on the trek, and, not be struggling so much with it. So those are my key takeaways of how I would train for a Kilimanjaro trip. I would be super interested to hear if you've got any other suggestions. And if you want to talk training at any point, then obviously we're here to help, and we can give you some advice or put you in the right direction. But those are my thoughts. That's what I do to get ready for a trek such as Kilimanjaro. So hopefully you've found that information useful. Anyway, I'll be back with another episode of the BucketLister Podcast next week. But until then, thanks very much and goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the BucketLister Podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.